You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Boy, do we have news for you. Yesterday, the JFK Files were released, all 80,000 pages across like 1,300 PDFs. And we've done all of the things that you can do to them, except, read them ourselves in 24 hours because, come on, it's 80,000 pages. Usually we save that kind of lack of reading for, house budget bills. We did throw a lot of the pages into our various corporate level AI software, and we've gone through all kinds of reports. We've dug through the populace, we've dug through the conspiracy theories, we've dug through the kind of more moderate takes on it. And here's what we found. It was Lee Harvey Oswald that killed JFK. Now, by the way, I've seen a very interesting take that we were going to, apparently Israel was going to be all over it. Oh man, they did it, right? They were like, the U.S. liberty's not enough. We got to go after JFK, or so the theorists say. And then Israel wasn't mentioned really at all in the documents, except for in one case, there was a reference to a Zionist group in Chicago that was just like a complaint about how they were classified under the Department of Justice, foreign group designation. That's it in the 80,000 pages. So that conspiracy theory should be out the window, but now the new theory is that because they weren't mentioned, that means they definitely did it. It's special. What we have been able to determine is that it looks like three key groups didn't do it. Number one, it doesn't look like the United States government internally tried to off JFK. I have seen some, even friends of mine on the right, who've claimed the documents prove that. I have yet to see a shred of evidence suggesting so. Number two, it proves that the Soviet Union did not directly order, at least from what the United States has ascertained, the assassination of JFK. Wasn't the case. That, by the way, if there was a conspiracy theory, that was the one I sided with. I thought that the most evidence showed that it was likely that the Soviet Union may have had a little more to do with it, or at least an agent or two inside the KGB had something to do with it and giving a little bit of a push. It does appear that the frantic freakout in the Soviet Union after learning that JFK was killed because, oh dear God, did we do it? That was legitimate. That fear was legitimate. They had no idea. It also wasn't Cuba. And I know there was also a lot of popular theories about that as well. However, we have learned some cool things from the documents that we didn't know before. One of those is an inside look at how the CIA actually operated during the Cold War and how they kept tabs on, for example, a New York journalist who was suspected of being an agent of Poland, and just how the CIA kind of kept tabs on the individual. Also, references to plans that the CIA had on destabilizing and overthrowing Fidel Castro, which was basically the CIA's love child throughout the entire Cold War, was correcting the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion and trying again. Didn't work. And there's a lot more to sift through. Unfortunately for those out there who were just expecting a massive safe full of smoking guns, no. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show regarding the fourth branch of government, which I am using fancy sarcastic air quotes for those of you who are listening and you're not watching live. By the way, just as one other argument, that there was a dedicated team of individuals who was shredding all of the incriminating documents specifically, and that was the master plan. They were going to get rid of all the incriminating documents, and so really, that's not how that works. That's not how government filing systems function. That was one of the things I wanted to mention. So on from the JFK files and the kind of nothing burger that was always going to be. Let's talk about Jerome Powell and the U.S. economy, and then the crazy federal judicial system. So Jerome Powell, toddled up as he does, man kind of walks like a penguin. I don't know if anyone ever noticed that. Kind of like a penguin in the middle scene from Mary Poppins when they jump into the chalk painting. So he kind of waddles on up there, and he releases some findings. And he makes some decisions based on those findings. So they made some projections. And the first thing that should be noted is that the Fed did put out a couple of projections suggesting that they lowered the gross domestic product projections for the United States slightly, and then slightly raised their inflation expectations. Number two, I should say this was prompted by a question from a journalist in the room. Powell does not predict a recession. He says the chance of a recession has increased slightly to a total of like 1% to 4% chance of a recession, which is very low. But then he also kind of covered his tracks and said, we don't really forecast those kinds of things, though. Now, by the way, that is actually what I would like to hear the Fed say. I don't like the Fed forecasting. The government sucks at money. I don't want them giving me broad-banded forecasts. They're not good at it. I don't even like forecasts from a lot of market experts because it's like meteorology. It's very easy to get wrong when you stray from principles and leave out several factors. He also did mention that tariffs cause inflation. And yeah, that's true. Tariffs can, in fact, cause inflation. How that manifests, though, again, inflation being a measure of just the cost of goods increasing as your money buys less of what it used to. Yeah, I mean, if there's a tariff on a particular good, that's going to increase. It's not going to increase across the board. But if a long-term tariff is put in place and it's a good that America 100% imports, then, or largely imports, then yeah, that's going to be something that the consumer feels in an inflation sense. Now, interestingly enough, this is related to the economy and it kind of funnels into some major Trump moves. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright cited a Daily Caller study today after a lot more was found foundationally. The Daily Caller team's excellent. They have a great reporting team. On President Biden hiding studies from everything relating to nuclear energy in the United States to natural gas, which is a major cripple to the economy that the Biden administration basically shoved on through and deleted any studies that they didn't like.
According to a new report, the Biden administration buried a study in order to justify their ban on liquefied natural gas export projects in 2024. That LNG ban, shutting that down. What can you tell us about that report?
Oh, extremely disappointed to see what was done. In fact, last night I was just reading the original report prepared by the Department of Energy in 2023 that clearly showed it was in Americans' interest to grow our LNG exports. It wouldn't impact domestic prices, and in fact, it would lower greenhouse gas emissions. That's what the report said, but the Biden administration had this all-of-government approach against climate change, which clearly wasn't really about climate change, or they would have supported things that were going to drive down greenhouse gas emissions. But for their political interests, or maybe the Jane Fonda TikTok on the Cameron Parish LNG terminal that was trying to get approved, in direct contrast to the results of that study, they initiated the LNG pause after that study was produced, but never released.
LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. So the core of that matter is that the United States should have been exporting massive amounts of natural gas to Europe, which, by the way, undercuts Russia and boosts the European economy throughout the Russo-Ukraine war. But Biden didn't do that. And there's a lot of speculation as to why. There's a massive scandal regarding the auto pen that we've talked about before regarding Biden natural gas executive orders might be a linchpin in that particular situation. Then we get over to how the left is responding to the Trump administration at all. And this boils down to kind of how the bureaucracy itself is handling the situation of Trump really taking a meat axe to the bureaucracy, the fourth branch of government that is not constitutional. And then the rest of the country on the left and how they're responding. So yesterday, Trump fired 2 commissioners at the Federal Trade Commission. And he fired 2 of the Democrat ones. And by the way, those are partisan positions. You're supposed to have at least, I believe, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and an independent. I think that the original rule actually states that you can't have 3 of the same party represented among the commissioners at the Federal Trade Commission. And Trump canned 2 of them. And the reasons why, at least there's not been an official statement as to why those particular FTC commissioners were fired, although there have been some shady things going on at the FTC over the last couple of years. But Alvaro Bedoya, who was a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission, threw an absolute hissy fit, suggesting that basically they should have gone harder after Jeff Bezos when they had the chance, and that the president only got rid of him because Trump is a big fan of Amazon or something. And so now he's suing the federal government. Best of luck to you. 1930 ruling stated that, the president can fire people in the executive branch of government. That's how that works. We'll catch the radio crew here in a second. This is the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, live stream and TV people, let's talk for just a moment about the way the left has responded on the ground. Because I got to tell you, I wasn't expecting them to just go full anarcho-terrorist and wholly endorse it, but here we are. So you remember the first Trump administration, how you had people like Maxine Waters that came out and said, you better get in their face and not make them feel comfortable. And like get in their face when they're at restaurants or whatever. Well, now it's just, hey, don't set vehicles on fire. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Here's Jimmy Kimmel, just like pretty underhandedly supporting domestic terrorism.
Vandalizing Tesla vehicles, new Tesla vehicles. Please don't vandalize. Don't ever vandalize Tesla vehicles. And so,
Yeah, good one. There are individuals who their vehicles are being assaulted, and they're not even like Republicans. Their vehicles are being keyed. Their vehicles are being set on fire. Dealerships are being set on fire. The charging stations are being set on fire. So much for the whole climate change thing. And speaking of guys who were supposedly like really in favor of electric vehicles, here's Tim Walz, who's just like endorsing the whole situation.
Saying on my phone, I don't know, some of you know this on the iPhone, they've got that little stock app. I added Tesla to it to give me a little boost during the day. 225 and dropping.
So I there's a lot of right-wing heartburn suggesting that the left is, cheering over the demise of a business. That doesn't bother me. Look, businesses, like everything else, are in fact political. Politics and culture are wholly linked. They're always going to be until you have a society that has common goals and foundations so that you don't have to worry about that. Things are going to get political. That's the bed that has been made. We're going to have to lie in it. What's really awkward, though, is that I was told that the electric vehicle thing was necessary to save the climate. That was the most important thing. Nothing else mattered. But the minute that Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency start exposing the waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, and projects like in USAID, sending transgender comics to South America, putting up Sesame Street over on in Iraq, and spreading atheism in Nepal, all of a sudden, it's time to start tipping things over and setting things on fire. Scott Jennings articulates this really clearly over on CNN, and the reactions to him making this explanation while the left sits there and fumes, it's pretty fantastic.
There's also, on the subject of Elon Musk, there's been all kinds of vandalism against Teslas and Tesla dealerships all over the country. Las Vegas, Kansas City, Encinitas, Buffalo Grove, Littleton, Mass. I grew up right next to Littleton, Mass. Loveland, Colorado, Tigard, Oregon, all over the place.
The other night, Donald Trump said these are domestic terrorists. Everybody laughed about it and scoffed at it. That video looks like terrorism to me. I mean, it's obviously an organized, coordinated effort, however people are communicating with each other, to do this to people around the country who chose to buy a Tesla at some point in the past, many of whom I'm sure are Democrats who bought them in the first place, all because their entire political worldview is ruled by their emotions. And that's the American left right now. It is one angry mob after another willing to take things into their own hands, up to and including keying, firebombing, and otherwise vandalizing cars and car dealerships and charging stations. It's outrageous. It is terrorism. People ought to be put in jail and left there for a very long time and be taught a lesson. So this right here, what's going on with a guy who helps our country, who runs successful companies, who doesn't have to be doing this, and now one of his companies is under systematic terroristic threat and violence all over the country, and people seem to be laughing about it or fine with it. It's outrageous. I've sat at this table and had people say, we should cut Elon Musk from the government totally. He rescued our astronauts today.
And that is an excellent point, given that the Boeing Starliner Biden collaboration turned what was supposed to be an under a week trip up to the International Space Station into a 9-month stranding of 2 U.S. astronauts. And Elon Musk's SpaceX brought them back to, that's right, Earth, safe and sound, right off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of America. We're going to pick up the radio crew and talk just a little bit about how this federal judges are responding to all of this. It's something special. It's the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Federal judges are the latest in a string of the same one-trick pony that the left has brought forward, by which I mean a lot of particular strategies the left has had over the past, in this case taking the form of judges appointed by Obama or by Bill Clinton or by Joe Biden, who have stepped forward to issue these grand edicts from the district court level that are basically anything the Trump administration does under its purview of constitutional authority, under the current understanding and the precedent set forth by the Supreme Court of the United States. The federal judges issue these blanket sweep injunctions. And these injunctions function as the left's way to roadblock anything being done in this administration. And first of all, as a manner of speaking, we should go over what some of the federal judges have done, and then let's actually look at the U.S. Constitution and discern if, in fact, these are violations, if they're non-issues, if this is actually the proper role of the judiciary, because we can get into the spin and the partisan, whatever about, oh, these judges are heroes, oh, these judges are just doing their job, oh, these judges are villains, whatever. Let's take a look at the cast of characters, because in the last couple of days, the federal judges are coming out of the woodwork and just issuing injunction after stay after freeze. So Chief Justice Roberts issued a statement after James Boasberg got a little bit testy about the Trump administration using an Alien Enemies Act to remove foreign individuals who are not citizens, who are not here legally, who are gang members, either in the Mexican drug cartels or in MS-13 or in Venezuela's Tren de Aragua, and then exported them from the country to be held in an El Salvador prison. And James Boasberg, a D.C. judge, tried issuing some type of weird stay that he claimed was for clarification, in which he tried to order planes to turn around because he stated that the President of the United States may not have the authority to carry out the current law on the books, which is silly. The President of the United States has the authority to use United States laws. And by the way, a U.S. District Court judge doesn't have the authority to hamper an action by the President of the United States carrying out his constitutional duties of upholding the peace and security of the United States from foreign threats. And guess what? Individuals coming into this country from foreign nations and powers acting as a member of a group designated unfriendly by the United States government can be removed. It's just that. That's the rules of the United States. You don't like it? Tough. Those are the rules of the game already laid out quite clearly and explicitly. And so then he asked the Department of Justice, well, I need to know all of the details about when his plane took off and where they went and how many there were and what they're going to do. And they need to give all this stuff to me. The Department of Justice just said, no, you don't have the authority. You are a U.S. District Court judge. If an appellate court or the Supreme Court of the United States asked for those documents, that might be a different situation. But the separation of powers goes all ways. Congress is supposed to be separate from the United States federal executive branch. Congress is not in charge of the president. The president is not in charge of Congress. The president is not in charge of the judiciary, and the judiciary is not in charge of the president, nor Congress. They are separate but equal branches of government. And so the Trump administration, calling this out, Trump in his classic style of just saying this guy needs to be out of here, says this guy needs to be impeached. Because he's issuing orders, he's writing checks that his authority can't cash. And then Chief Justice Roberts, just out of nowhere from the Supreme Court, issued a little statement saying, quote, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. So I will point out that it's a little funny that Chief Justice Roberts felt the need to issue a statement at this point. Again, not about the individuals protesting outside SCOTUS judges' homes, not over the Biden administration threatening to pack the courts, not over the leaker of the Dobbs decision that was a serious national security risk to high-up individuals in the federal government on all 3 branches. But on this, he comes out and makes a statement about a judicial decision, which, by the way, no judicial decision has actually been made. The judge hasn't ruled anything. He's simply issuing stays because he wants to pause and look at everything. He doesn't have the authority to do so. It's not how that works. Now, James Boasberg is not the only judge getting a little bit frisky. So Judge Tonya Chutkan, a U.S. district judge, has ordered the Trump administration to unterminate $14 billion in grants awarded to 3 climate groups by the Biden administration, saying the government's, quote, vague and unsubstantiated assertions of fraud are insufficient, end quote. Yeah, you can't do that. That's not a reason to do so. We already have a ruling on the books that says for services paid, yeah, you got to give money. There are no services that have been rendered here to the United States. And if the president of the United States and the executive branch decide that they're not going to give grants to someone because the employees work for the president of the United States, that's how an executive agency works. And all of a sudden it's, well, actually, no, you have to give money to climate groups. She doesn't have the authority to do so. And it's not even oh, well, I don't want her to have the authority to do so because she's a liberal and I'm a conservative and this is how I want things to be. No, there's just nothing in the Constitution or set law that says anything whatsoever about a judge being allowed to order monies and disbursement from the executive branch. Nothing, not even a little bit. There's not a single point in all of U.S. history in which a judge was allowed to force the president of the United States or force an executive agency to direct money in a specific fashion. That's not a judicial issue, that's a congressional issue. That's, again, one of the reasons why that Congress kind of holds the powers of impeachment there. Next judge. Anna Reyes, a D.C. judge, has ordered a preliminary injunction in favor of a trans activist in the military who sued the United States over the president's executive order ban on transgender service members. It just so happens that Judge Anna C. Reyes is the first LGBTQ plus judge appointed in 2023 by the Biden administration. Funny how that works out. Again, not her authority. Not her authority. You can't grant a temporary injunction that orders the president of the United States how to be the commander-in-chief. He's the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. If you have judges that are able to tell the president of the United States how to be the commander-in-chief, then you now have an unequal balance of power in the United States. The powers are no longer separate. You would have a judge with more authority over the U.S. military than the president of the United States. That's not how that works. That takes power away from the people. The people elect the president to serve as the commander-in-chief of the armed services. She has no authority to do this, and just because she's, prefers a different partner in the bedroom and has decided to be an activist over it doesn't give her the authority to somehow direct the United States military. It's not how it works. Theodore Chuang, an Obama-era judge, has now ordered the Trump administration, although I say that with some air quotes around it, he ordered Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to fully reinstate the United States International Agency for International Development, USAID, after he says they dismantled it. None of those things are true. First of all, Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency have no actual task of authority in which they directly fire or hire people. That's not a thing. They perform an auditor advisory service for the president and for the federal agencies, recommending hirings and firings. We got to let the radio crew go in a second. We'll chat about this with Jim Pfaff when y'all get back. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. Furthermore, on the Elon Musk situation, Trump didn't shut USAID down. He put it in the full structure and authority of the State Department, which when JFK brought USAID into being as an executive order, it was under the State Department. So you have this judge issuing a very weird conclusion, granting this preliminary injunction saying that, well, now USAID has to go out and deliver transgender comic books to Peru. He doesn't have the authority. And this will end in the Supreme Court of the United States. And this brings us to a conversation about why all of this matters. This is why when I start describing the news regarding federal judges, when I start talking about Trump and the executive agencies or Congress and any of the whining and the bleeding and the moves about it, In the last 100 years, the President of the United States has been given an extraordinary amount of power with executive agencies. Executive agencies, this bureaucracy that we're going to talk about a little bit later, this fourth branch of government, operates with an extreme amount of regulatory and rules-based power on a massive budget that they get to decide where things go to individual projects. It is an abdication of the duties of the United States Congress in creating these massive agencies. But because they are executive agencies, explicitly according to the U.S. Constitution in Article 2, which is the overview of the executive branch of government, the president is the head of the executive branch, period. Everyone in every agency, every single one, from the Department of Labor to the Department of Education, from USAID and the Department of State, all the way to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, ad nauseum, are explicit employees of the president, period. They are his employees. That is what the Constitution says very, very carefully. Because if they aren't, then the United States becomes coup d'etat, just like a beautiful piece of meat for a coup waiting to happen. Because when individuals have kind of piecemeal power over various aspects of government, then you've created a situation in which there is no actual balance and accountability system. You simply have whoever is in a position who's been there longer trying to one-up the other branch of government. And it's a major issue that has been left really to fester and rot for the last 100 years. So, there's been a lot of conversation as to what the presidency, what Trump's administration should do. From my perspective and my reading of the Constitution, as well as legal scholars far and above my present legal ability, is that the president when it comes to a U.S. district court filing random injunctions, the president should just ignore them. He should ignore them. His team should ignore them until a court with the appropriate authority then steps in. Because until the Supreme Court solves this, it's just going to be injunction after injunction every day. There's a rumor that Trump is going to sign some kind of executive order attempting to shut down the Department of Education officially later. USA Today was reporting that. And if that ends up happening, I guarantee you it'll be judges sprinting over themselves to say he can't do that. If it's a judge high enough up, maybe. But U.S. district judges that attempt to do this weird mix of governmental authority usurpation are in direct violation of the U.S. Constitution. It carries no more weight than if I told you you had to wear a specific color of shirt. I have no authority to do so. It's not a crime. It's not evil. It just doesn't mean anything if I say, hey, you need to wear a red shirt because I am Tony Kinnett of the Tony Kinnett Cast. So, individuals claiming that this is about judicial purity need to read the Constitution before they run their mouths. We'll be back with a second. Jim Pfaff's on the line. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. Every day I pull out a couple of clips for the Top News in 10 segment that we do at about 5 a.m. And while I'm pulling out a bunch of the most watched clips of the previous day, I see Chuck Schumer and AOC out there fighting like middle school girls arguing over who gets the best locker. And it's really awkward, and you get secondhand embarrassment from it. And I'm most surprised by just the endless, everlasting gobstopper variety of clips. They just keep coming. And so if we're going to break down some of the future of the Democratic Party, if we're going to break down where this all ends up, who ends up on top of the middle school girl pile, as it were, you bring on the master Politico himself, Jim Pfaff, over at the Conservative Caucus. So I figured you'd like that. I did. I thought you'd get a hoot out of that intro.
Yeah, you have my everlasting devotion now.
Oh, well. So tell us, are these fights really going to be everlasting? Who's gonna end up at the shake of this thing?
Well, the way politics works is eventually people wake up and realize they want to win. How soon that's going to happen in this case, I don't know. Listen, AOC for example, is devoted to socialist communist ideology when it comes to the state. She believes, just like Chuck Schumer did when he was on The View, decrying people who want to keep their own money and who think the government can't tell them how to run their companies. And it's like, that attitude is deeply within the Democrat Party. They had a chance with Joe Biden to implement much of that, and the American people rejected it soundly in November. So, like I say, in politics, sometimes eventually people get their mind straight over a period. I don't know when that's going to be, and right now it doesn't look like it's going to happen before 2026.
2026 is a lot closer than many people are giving it credit for. As we always say right after an election, the midterms are a lot closer than you would think. And it's wild to see. I think the party can't get any lower than this. The Democrat Party, certainly they've reached their biggest point of drama because at some point cooler heads, at least in the strategic sense, are going to prevail. They're going to get the party kind of rallied up and they're going to start getting out a singular message again because it has to, right? This is what the Democrat Party has been known for. And instead, every day, it's worse. I mean, Schumer's going out there saying stuff that's so awful. Whoopi Goldberg is like waving her flabby arms, trying to cut him off as they try to cycle out the music. AOC is just going, "Hi guys, I don't know why I made this video. I'm just sad. Goodbye." And like, that's the line. And now Jasmine Crockett is trying to take the party. I mean, come on. How can it get any worse? Yet every day it does.
Yeah, and when it comes to AOC and Jasmine Crockett, I mean, they're so young, they don't quite have the experience in either of their cases to be able to take over a party, much less the demeanor, and they certainly can't win. But listen, what we have to do in response to this, as conservatives, as constitutionalists, is to be good at our own game. This is why Republicans, in my opinion, have a reputation for snatching victory out of the jaws of defeat, because they're not good at their own game. They don't try to do well at their own game. This is a real phenomenon of Donald Trump. He's always trying to be good at his game. And you can argue about how good in this area or whether you like that policy.
Or what game he's trying to be good at or something like that.
That's right. But he's good at what he does because he is relentless. He is determined. He's got his ideas. He understands them well. He knows what he wants to say about them. And he also has judgment in terms of how much do I want to say or how far do I want to go. He actually makes those considerations. And again, you can argue how much you like them or not. The fact that he just takes the time to do that, to put that effort into it, is a real positive. Republicans have sucked at that for many, many years. I have just, as you know, I have just really languished working in Republican politics for 30 years. It drives me nuts, these people, that most of them are so dumb. So well, that's the game, though, is we've got to be good at our game. We don't worry about their game. Let them spin in the wind. Let's go do our thing. And let's take them down and make them pay for every mistake that they commit.
So as one of the guys who I count on to throw a glass bottle at me when I'm off the beaten path. I have a working theory about why the left is so terrible at long-term policy. I think they get way too much credit for it. So the left, like they did with executive orders, like they did with LGBTQ+, diversity, agency regulations, cancel culture, immigration, the nuclear option, all of the various strategies that the left has used. They're now doing the same thing with the judicial orders and injunctions from the district court judges. So they go way too far, way too fast, and they treat what should be a political tool used like really sparingly and only at the right time like a one-trick pony. And they ride it until it dies on its feet, which I found out after I post. Not many people know that you can actually ride a horse until it dies, like up until that moment. That's what they're doing now with these judicial orders that are completely unconstitutional. And they don't realize that they're digging their own grave in the process. Do you think that there are any Democrats that are sitting back kind of biting their nails saying, ooh, I'm not sure if this is a good idea?
Not too many of them. Here's the other thing, too. Although I totally believe that what these circuit court judges are doing is outrageous. I mean, you've got a little district. You're one of a couple circuit judges in San Francisco and you're making a ruling broadly over the executive branch. Judges are supposed to rule on discrete cases. What I mean by that is the case in front of them is what they should be ruling on and adjudicating. Well, when they have the authority to rule, and it's not a jury, but they should be adjudicating the case in front of them. They should not be making broad sweeping judgments. That's left for appellate courts where more information comes in, if at all. I mean, I believe all judicial process should be about those discrete cases. That's what's outrageous about this. But let's be fair. From time to time, you do pick and choose, and you decide that this is something worth fighting for, and you try to go for it. But Democrats have lost that. The real negative of this strategy in the long run, and we're not feeling it all right now because of all the cases that are coming, but the real weakness of this strategy is that they're going to get the same response from the American people that they got in November because of all the lawfare that went against Donald Trump. This is lawfare of a different sort. This is, by the way, Mark Elias, George Soros, and the Open Society Foundation is funding a lot of this stuff. This is the type of thing they do to try to get to a place where they can win the day, because they can't win at the ballot box. Yeah. And this is also evidence that the chances of them pulling back from their ideological stance, from their policy prescriptions that they try to go after, and for their general desire for long-term effort and where they want to go, they're not likely to pull away from it. They're human beings. They don't want to give up what they've fought for. And so that could accrue to a wave election in 2026. I'm not predicting that yet because we got a little ways to go here.
But that's a factor that, again, if you continue to ratchet up the pressure, that will likely have an impact on the electoral outcome.
Absolutely. So that, but again, we have to be good at what we're doing. So Donald Trump, and to his credit, he's doing this. He needs to stay right on top of everything that he's doing right now. Relentlessly continue to pursue it, go after the win, and don't give up. And he does have, with some weaknesses and frustrations that bother me, but by and large, he's got a cabinet. He's got people in place that he has had nominated into key positions that are more than willing to undertake that effort as well. I'm encouraged by that.
The problem is that there's a real disconnect here. I mean, obviously, the judicial situation is curious, and looking at how we move forward with that when the Supreme Court finally gets involved in appellate courts, et cetera. However, what does start to get a bit interesting for me when I look at the, kind of the overarching analysis of the situation, I go on TV. So, pick a network. I'll go on and they'll pair me up with some liberal or Democrat analyst, strategist, whatever. And the Democrat strategist will largely agree about the problems in their party. They'll say, yeah, I don't think that maybe the courts going the way they are is really that great. I don't think the Democrats are doing the thing. And so I'm hearing the strategists and the people that are supposedly having weight in the party saying one thing. And then I'm hearing the representatives and the senators saying something completely different. And it just feels a little off to me. Can y'all make heads or tails of that? Why is there such a disconnect between the strategists, so to speak, and then the representatives out in front, preening in front of Americans?
There are a couple reasons for that. When I listen to CNN things, Scott Jennings on CNN or my friend Shermichael Singleton over there, right, and they're trying to make their arguments, the strategists at that table are still as whacked out as ever. So you're seeing some of the possibly, I haven't seen the ones you were with in total, but some of them that might be a little bit more thoughtful and trying to think things out. I don't think that there's much in the Democrat Party right now that I'm observing that shows that they're really, taking a critical look at what's been going on and what are the next steps yet. But again, that may happen. Listen, no one likes to lose. Everyone hates to lose. So they're going to realize losing is happening, and then we're going to have to watch what they're doing. Again, that just to repeat, and I'm being a broken record here, that's why we got to be great at what we do. But they're still trying to figure out where they're going, what it means. We did this when Barack Obama became president.
Precisely.
And we had some positive result.
Well, but you also had a party during the Obama administration that had leadership in the House and the Senate that got everyone together and said, okay, here's what you do. Don't be embarrassing. Stand in a unified fashion. and make sure that above all that you're calling out things when it's appropriate, but also don't be stupid. Don't get out there and start screaming about, grabbing the muskets as Walsh, Joe Walsh made the case back when he, wasn't on the left side of the aisle. So that largely worked because it created a finger pointing situation. Instead, you've got, Jasmine Crockett, AOC, and the rest of the younger progressives that are acting like children. And don't get me wrong, the right has its fair share of children, but man, what a time to not act like complete fools. And they can't do it.
Well, Barack Obama wasn't the worst politician in the world. He was actually, I'd give him about a B as a politician. And he did bring some central planning into what they were doing in an aggressive, evil way, because he was implementing community organizer crap, most of which we're seeing Elon Musk reveal right now that got into the government. So you had leadership there. They have none. There is no leadership right now in the Democrat Party, and I'm not exaggerating to say that. There was a recent poll, and of people that got no more than 10%, there are about 15 of them. There is no leader, and the very number one person that Democrats thought were their leader was AOC. She got 10%. So they
followed closely by Kamala because she's such a great George Washington figure.
Yeah, she was way down the list. I mean, it was AOC and Obama, but they don't have leadership right now. There's no rudder to the system at present. So they're kind of trying to figure their way. And again, I don't see how they pick it up quickly enough by 2026, but I've also seen that happen when it surprised me on both sides. So we just have to keep our eyes out. They're not going to find a good leader, though, quickly. Gavin Newsom is making a pitch at that by doing his podcast and trying to seem all reasonable, which he's an unreasonable, selfish person, but he's trying to do it. Tim Walz now is making his big push. That's not going to be successful because he sounds stupid as anything. But boy, is he pushing hard.
I'm sorry. You bring up Tim Walz saying he's going to get out there and start putting boots to butts, and I lose it. Oh, man. Jim Pfaff, the conservative caucus. Unfortunately, we're a bit short on the time side of things, but what a great way to end. Thanks so much for spending a bit of time with us as always.
Glad to do it, my friend, always.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett cast, and look out for Tim Walz.
Primal scream.
We're a little bit creeped out.
This is the Tony Kinnett cast on 93 WIBC.
Right. As far as the radio clock side of things on this one, there are severe weather alerts that are going out across two of the syndicated stations. One of those is out of kind of our home broadcast out in Indianapolis. So they're going to join us in when they have a second, if they haven't already joined us. If you are in Western Indiana, please be safe. These storms are nothing to mess with. All righty. Let's talk a little bit about the fourth branch of the U.S. government. Now, those of you who actually took civics, and I don't just mean you watched a video 3 years ago online, the fourth branch of government shouldn't exist. There are supposed to be three co-equal branches of government who all have their own areas of expertise and do not have unequal, undue power over the other. And we have completely lost sight of what that means at all. So, you have the legislative branch, which writes laws and then impeaches individuals in the other two branches who do not uphold their constitutional authority under the laws passed by that Congress. Then you have the executive branch of government, which enforces the laws, and the federal executive branch of government, the extra employees that are part of agencies which are responsible for making sure that the president can do his job as the commander-in-chief, as the chief executive, as the head of the United States. Then you have the judicial branch. The judicial branch's job is to interpret laws against the U.S. Constitution. That's it. The judicial branch's job is to ensure that the Congress and that the president don't magically decide one day that the law on the books actually means something different and then, goes out and starts doing a bunch of crazy stuff that it's not supposed to do. And the checks and balances among those particular groups are also separated, not just by the role they fill, but also by their jurisdiction. So, allow me to explain. There are also executive branch members of government that do not have authority on other parts of the executive branch. For example, the head of the Food and Drug Administration does not have the ability to order the United States Army around. So if you're a corporal in the United States Army and you are standing at post at Benning, let's say, God bless the poor guy standing on, he's up on Sand Hill at Benning, and the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. shows up. And he's here, and he walks up, and he says, "Corporal, drop and give me 20. Secretary Kennedy does not have any authority to tell him to do that. It's not his job. In the same way, by the way, you have Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who walked up to the individuals over at the Department of Education and said, "You need to step aside and let me in." She doesn't have the authority to do that. Congress people cannot, outside of an actual subpoena where they tell someone to come in front of Congress, they cannot just order people around in public, despite them being a congressperson can't order a judge around, and a judge can't order a member of the legislative branch or the executive branch around. That's not how that works. It's not. There are also jurisdictions like Violate. So the best way to explain this is that you can't have the lower members of the totem pole who file massive charges or can create massive actions on a senior member of another branch or even of the same branch. Great example. Here in Indiana, your average county sheriff cannot arrest the governor of the state. Can't do it. Does not have the legal authority to just show up to the Capitol building or to the State House in Indianapolis, walk up to Governor Braun's office, knock on the door and say, "Hi, I'm the sheriff of Hancock County, Indiana. You're under arrest." Doesn't have the authority to do that. A state trooper, I believe, I actually don't know if that's changed. I know that conservation officers in Indiana have that authority, but not every officer of law enforcement has that authority. In the same way, a district court judge cannot file an injunction for the entire United States ordering the executive branch how to act. That's not a thing they have the authority to do. Again, it's not even a case of whether or not that particular judge is correct. A district court judge cannot answer or uphold or file a stay on the whole U.S. government. That's not a thing that can be done. And depending on what it is that we're talking about, maybe an appellate judge might have the ability to order some kind of a stay or an injunction nationwide. For massive decisions on the federal government control, if it has to do with the budget, that's a congressional impeachment situation. If it has to do on how the president is carrying out the law, that's under the Supreme Court of the United States. That's it. Even if it was a federal judge on the conservative side and he wanted to slap a nationwide injunction that says, "Biden, you can't withhold resources from Texas because the Texans are not going after your border plan for the southern border," that federal judge has no authority to issue that kind of an injunction. He doesn't. He does not. Only the Supreme Court of the United States has the authority, or maybe, depending on the situation, an appellate judge has the authority to tell the president of the United States and the executive agencies what to do. Now, the problem is the executive agencies are massive, and they've become so massive and so drunk with power, issuing regulations and rules and giving out special, congressional funds known as grants. Federal agencies just giving out money. Congress is yeah, here's your budget. Assign grants to various groups. That now the Supreme Court says, well, actually, the federal agencies now are their own branch of government. The President of the United States can no longer hire and fire members of federal agencies. He cannot order federal agencies to give grants in certain ways. If the chief executive is not the chief of the executive, then that makes it a fourth branch of government, which also means that it is not subject to the co-equal balance of power and the separation of powers, which is why you had federal agencies threatening to sue United States senators for requesting certain files be sent to them at the end of the Biden administration, which is not allowed. That's not a thing that can happen. But when you create a fourth branch of government to be this Wilsonian imperial German idea of large government by the experts, what you end up getting is a very corrupt bureaucracy that has no manner whatsoever of accountability. So please, for those who are suggesting that the EPA under the Biden administration, they decided they were going to assign some grants. Okay. They were going to assign these grants to these climate groups, and they haven't given the money out yet, but they said, we're going to give you this grant money. If the President of the United States does not have the authority, or Lee Zeldin, head of the EPA, does not have the authority to decide who gets what grants in the EPA, who does? Who does? You say, well, the courts do. Why? Where in the Constitution does it say that the courts get to decide who gets what grants from the federal government? Court doesn't hold the power of the purse. You say, well, Congress does. Well, Congress already signed off on the EPA getting an amount of money. Show me in the bill where Congress said you need to assign X amount of dollars to Y group from the EPA by this date and time. It ain't there. You say, well, I really don't want the President of the United States and Lee Zeldin or whoever, getting to decide what to do with these massive federal agencies. Hey, I hear you. Shouldn't have given him that much power. Believe me, I would be more than happy to support a bill right now that cuts 80% of the federal government and 80% of their budget and kicks it all back to Congress so that your representative has to work for a living. Radio crew, we'll see you later. It's the Tony Kinnett cast. Stay safe in the storm. All right, we'll do a little bit of bonus tonus tonight because I didn't quite get to, talk about various things. All right, great question from the comment section. So they ask, the executive branch has an army and a military. That kind of little bit redundant here. Does the judicial branch get the same? Yes. Yes, the judicial branch gets to issue orders to the President of the United States if he is not upholding a constitutional, if he is not following a law on the books according to the United States Constitution. Now, there's also something called prosecutorial discretion. There are levers in place that keep power in check. The judicial branch does not hold all of the levers of power over the executive branch. It doesn't have that. Just in the same way, the executive branch does not hold all of the levers of power over the congressional, the legislative branch, or the judicial. It's divvied up. And by the way, we're leaving out a massive part of the realm of control, the voters. If you don't like how the President of the United States is upholding the law, if you do not like how he is prosecuting the law in his jurisdiction, if you don't like how his discretion interprets how the law is to be upheld and carried out, then you get him out of office. This is why really awful city prosecutors, for example, in Indianapolis, there's a guy named Ryan Mears, the State House doesn't have the authority to boot him out of office. That is a consequence that must be on the shoulders of the voters in Marion County in the center of Indiana. The judicial doesn't have the authority to impeach a member of the executive branch or to order a member of the executive branch to do something new or to restore something that's under their authority. They don't have the ability. The judicial cannot assign what a specific unlisted, non-constitutionally obligated branch of government should be doing. Again, it has nothing to do with the political beliefs of the individual. It's just not a mechanism of government. You say, well, I think it should because I think that the judicial should check the executive government. Okay, that's great. But the Constitution is really explicit about what that means. You don't just get to make up what you think the judicial branch gets to do in regard to the President of the United States. The idea that the President of the United States doesn't get to direct the military is silly. It's really, really silly. And the idea that the transgender issue, that a judge, an LGBTQ activist, decides that Trump doesn't have the authority to issue a ban on transgender military service, that's a national security issue. The medical data shows that individuals who are transgender are mentally unstable because they are suffering from gender dysphoria. That is unsafe for a unit. That is not good for a fighting team. It is disrespectful, and it puts a lot on the line. Not to mention the safety of those on the team of the individual who is going through the particular mental illness. The President of the United States, under his authority as the commander-in-chief, can decide who's in the military and who isn't, based on a serious understanding of national security. The President of the United States, using the Alien Enemies Act, is allowed to get rid of people in this country, not who are citizens, but who are from a foreign entity deemed to be a national security threat. You say, well, I don't like that. That violates due process. That has nothing to do with due process. You can just pick random legal words out of thin air and use them and make some kind of an argument. Like, well, but we're a republic. That means that the people get a voice, don't they? No, that's not what a republic means. A republic doesn't mean the will of the people. The blind, naked will of the people is democratic mob rule. A republic is an institution of government set about in which people, citizens of that country, the common foundation of government force, elect representatives to a government who then appoint to the judiciary and legislate and execute the authority of laws passed. That is a republic. So out here you can scream whatever you want. I want this. I want that. That's not how it works. And the left doesn't understand this. That's why they're running around the country setting fires to Teslas. They think, well, if the people stand up and we just set a bunch of things on fire, then that's standing up for the people. No, that shows that you have no idea how government works and you have no idea how people work either. Because if you think that after your performance in 2024, when you acted like nutcases, running around doing drag shows in front of children and importing illegal immigrants and gang members that killed people like Lake and Riley by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, all of a sudden you're going to turn around and start setting things on fire because you didn't get what you want? You think that the country is going to put up with another Summer of Love BLM style? No. Now, do I think that the Congress is actually going to go through with impeaching a bunch of these federal judges? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think you have to. Because it's not even a matter of whether or not you think that Boasberg should in fact be a district court judge in the United States. And where his jurisdiction ends, by the way. I believe that you simply go about your business the same way that if the governor of Kansas called me tonight and ordered me to do something, that means nothing to me. I don't live in Kansas. At all. I never have lived in Kansas. Been there. I like Kansas, but I don't live there. He has no authority to tell me what to do. If a police officer off duty, out of his jurisdiction, anyone ever seen Smokey and the Bandit? Have you ever seen Smokey and the Bandit? One of the greatest movies of all time. Burt Reynolds is being chased by Buford T. Justice of Texas. And once Buford T. Justice is out of his county, is out of his part of the state in Texas, he can't arrest anybody for nothing. And cops throughout the chase, all the way back from Texarkana, back to Georgia, remind him, you have no, the Lord of the Rings, you have no power here. It's not even a case as to whether or not, and by the way, if Trump is violating the Constitution by doing any of these things, then here's what happens. The next higher court takes it, and then the Supreme Court rules on it. Now, the reason the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it already is because of two things. Number one, because there's a million cases in line. The Supreme Court of the United States was created in a time where we did not expect there to be umpteen number of cases stacked one on top of each other so that they had years worth of lawsuits to hear and go through and issue rulings on. It wasn't supposed to be that way. That isn't how it was set up. That's an efficiency issue. That's an actual limit of the way the United States was set up. Now, does it need reform? That's a question for others to answer, and how those particular cases are seen and how certain injunctions or stays are granted. Now, there's a really great question. Can the Trump administration go straight to the Supreme Court? Kind of. The Trump administration can ask the Supreme Court to issue kind of like an immediate ruling, like lift a stay or pause an injunction until they get to it. But it's not exactly set up in a way that the Supreme Court has to answer by this time, by this date. So, while a very good question, it's not always a set in stone, this is the thing that will happen afterward kind of a situation. Last but not leastly, the second thing that I wanted to get to is to why the Supreme Court of the United States doesn't have the ability to, well, not that they don't have the ability. The reason that the Supreme Court of the United States is not already stepping in and putting a lot of these district court judges down, because again, those are like in a way, direct employees of the Supreme Court of the United States. They're members of the judiciary. By the way, it's also why Chief Justice Roberts is so protective of them. Hugh Hewitt made this point, and though I disagree with the end sentiment, I think that his foundation is correct. One of the reasons that Chief Justice Roberts rebuked Donald Trump, as he has before, is because Chief Justice Roberts is like a mother hen, and he is very protective of his judges. And he did that in the first Trump administration as well, suggesting there are no Obama judges, there are no Trump judges, there are no Bush judges, there are just judges. And that's stupid and wrong. But I get I get where the feeling's coming from. It's just very misplaced. The reason that the Supreme Court of the United States is not taking this up right now is because they're kind of scared to. That's kind of the underlying secret. The United States has been kind of chugging along in this federal bureaucracy. Agencies do all of the work of Congress, and district court judges do all of the work of the Supreme Court. And we just kind of march along very slowly in this weird ethereal jello. We can't really move. We can't really do anything. It's just kind of sluggishly gridlocked. And gridlock in and of itself has been treated as a virtue by the Supreme Court of the United States. At some point, this will have to come to an end. It will have to come to an end. It will have to be a leveled down approach by the Supreme Court of the United States for two reasons, and then I'll let everyone head out. It's been a long enough bonus tonus as it is. The first reason that it will come to an end is because the Supreme Court, at the end, even Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts, cannot argue that Article 2 of the United States Constitution does not grant the President of the United States authority over the executive branches of government's lock, stock, and barrel. Now, Congress has to approve a lot of positions, that's true. But Elon Musk isn't going through doing things that require approval. He's performing an audit and then recommendations. So if Trump and then his secretaries and cabinet directors are the ones that are firing or hiring people, that's their job. I mean, you'd even find individuals like Sotomayor really hard-pressed to interpret Article 2 differently. There's nothing in the Constitution about the unilateral authority of federal agencies. And by the way, you did see this in the federal decision that in Chevron, in which they said that agencies can't just make stuff up and you have to follow them. That's not a thing. So the second reason that I believe this is going to be solved and that this is going to be that this is going to end with the federal judiciary an outline very detailed, the size and scope very clearly defined as to what they can and can't do, is because the society demands it. Right now, you have a lot of institutions that have completely forsaken the trust of the American people. It looks really bad for a federal judge to say you have to keep the Venezuelan Tren de Agua, not citizen, not legal immigrant gang members in the United States. That looks terrible. It looks terrible for a judge to say, I'm the first LGBTQ plus 2IA judge. I rule you have to have trans people. The president is not allowed to direct the military. It looks awful for a federal judge to demand that your money be sent to climate change groups. It looks horrible for a federal judge to rule that U.S. aid money has to continue going to transgender comics in Peru and Sesame Street productions in Baghdad. It looks terrible. And the American people, every time you whittle away institutional trust, it doesn't come back. It ain't coming back. There are a lot of rosy ideas, even with people inside organizations that I work with, that have this rosy-eyed rabbit smile that we're going to somehow rebuild institutions in the United States, and the culture is not there. Before you rebuild institutional trust, the culture of the United States will have to organically turn towards a set of common values. Institutions are built from culture, not the other way around. Thoughts and prayers, Liz Cheney, and the technocrats who believe that institutions can govern culture from the top down. That's not a thing. The French tried it. The Soviets tried it. The Chinese have tried it. Iran has tried it. That's not a thing. You can't do it. You can try. Doesn't work. And if you erode cultural trust in the institutions to a point where the public no longer believes, which is where we're quickly approaching, that the courts should have any legitimate power to order the executive in the interpretation of the Constitution whatsoever, even in areas in which it is their jurisdiction constitutionally, you have completely eroded the fundamental belief of the United States and it becomes essentially a kind of constitutional monarchy, which we're already dangerously close to. So when I say that judges in the United States right now are violating the Constitution and that therein are creating a constitutional and a judiciary crisis, I mean that in an objective sense. They're violating Article 2 of the Constitution. They're violating Article 3 of the Constitution, overtly. Regardless of whether the outcome is conservative or liberal or libertarian or Saskatchewanese, who cares? That is exactly how precedent in the United States is illustrated throughout prior court rulings at the federal and the Supreme Court level. And with that, I am probably going to have to hop off the air as the storm is starting to get a little interesting around here as well, and I should probably get to a bit of a safer place. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care. Have an excellent evening. I hope that you and your loved ones find a bit of respite. If you're in a place with storms, be safe. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.